From the earliest moments of my getting to know the MSX as a gaming platform, one of the most often mentioned games amongst MSX fans was always Nemesis, also known as Gradius. Of course, this was an arcade title originally, but the MSX is where the game is at its most magical somehow. I have an odd relationship with this game though. I've actually played Nemesis easily the most on my NES from a pirate cart where the game occasionally glitches like mad. And I also had it on my C64, long before I got my own MSX even. But one of my old schoolmates had this on his MSX, and that's where I realized how interesting this game could actually be. Well, more specifically, how much more interesting this game made the MSX computers. As there are probably more variations of MSX computers than games made for it, at least back in the day, you could sometimes get different results in different hardware when playing Nemesis. Apparently, if you play this game on an MSX2, you get better scrolling and some other advantages. If you have a second cartridge slot in your MSX, you can plug in a TwinBee cartridge in the other port. You would get some TwinBee graphics for Nemesis. Using the Game Master cartridge in the other port would give you more lives or a further starting level. There was also a re-release in a Konami compilation called Game Collection 3, which had arguably better music than even the arcade version, but you would need an SCC Plus cartridge to get the better music. Nemesis was also the first Mega-ROM released by Konami, so it was a lot bigger than any previous MSX game prior to that. So I'm suspecting a lot of the awe that Nemesis inspired at the time had more to do with what else was available at the time, but that doesn't mean it's not a good game. In an MSX library, this is definitely one of the necessary ones to experience, hopefully in all its forms. The next game is one I wrote an article on as one of the specific Finnish game reviews in my blog, Minor Machine. It was the first Finnish game I ever noticed that was released exclusively for the MSX. As my review says, it's not a particularly innovative game since it's little more than a variant of Boulder Dash, but what makes Minor Machine an interesting game is that it was also released in Europe by Eaglesoft and System 4, neither of which were authorized by the creators, so they never got any royalties for the European sales. Although it looks much like Boulder Dash, Minor Machine does have its own thing going on for it. You'll notice a lack of gravity here, and the levels are all as large as the screen allows, which isn't much, since the graphics are a bit larger than in Boulder Dash. It's also a lot more difficult than Boulder Dash because of the changes in gameplay and the very specific manner in which all the levels must be completed, more like puzzles than the more action-based levels in Boulder Dash. There's also an inbuilt room editor in Minor Machine, so you'll get as much of content for the game as you could ever wish. My personal nostalgia for this game has more to do with reading reviews of it from Finnish gaming magazines at the time, since I didn't get to play it before emulation came along. But for me, that's enough to have it on one of these lists. Another magazine-based acquaintance is Choro Q, a curious little arcade-styled platforming puzzler from Taito. At first, it looks suspiciously like City Connection, but the two games really have very little in common. What is common in both games is that you jump around in a car through somewhat similarly structured levels, and that the game scrolls both left and right. You also need to watch out for other vehicles in both games. Your mission in Choro Q isn't to drive over all the surface, but rather to compile cars by dropping parts on top of each other in the correct order, which is much more difficult than it would seem at first. In terms of gameplay, Choro Q isn't one of the most comfortable or intuitive games, and it might take a while to get into the rhythm of it, but like most classic arcade games, it has that certain something about it that makes you keep on going, hunting for that elusive personal best. The last two games for today were favorites of a friend of mine who passed away almost exactly 2 years ago, so consider this a way to keep his memory alive. One of his favorites he used to mention when talking about MSX was a funky little maze game called Mutant Monty. Now I know Mutant Monty had been released on other platforms as well, but the MSX version is the first I heard of it and tried out. The original Spectrum version was released in 1984, while the MSX version wasn't published until 1986. Mutant Monty was, in some weird manner, a parody of all the Manic Miners, Monty Moles and Pac-Mans that were being cloned endlessly at the time. Instead of a strict platformer or a maze game, Mutant Monty takes elements from both genres and turns the concept into an unholy mess of a maze game in which you need to figure out the best routes to all the gold you need to pick up before exiting the level. Very reminiscent of Manic Miner in that sense, except it kind of plays more like Pac-Man. The gameplay is a bit awkward in that you move much quicker left and right than you do up and down, and there is an odd sense of inertia to your movement, but only when moving left and right. If for no other reason, that makes Mutant Monty a very singular game, and its visual humor is so bizarre that it defies description. I just might have to write a comparison of it one day, but I'm not sure I'd recommend it to anyone without an acquired taste. Still, as proven by my late friend, it can certainly do for a nostalgia trip. And then we have a Namco classic that most of us retro gamers probably know better by its first sequel, Battle City. The original, Tank Battalion, was made for the arcades in 1980, and the only direct home conversion was made for the MSX computers in 1984. It also appeared on some more obscure 8-bit computers like the Sword M5 with slight alterations, but the MSX version is actually pretty close to the arcade original. If you're familiar with Battle City, the basic idea is the same. You control a tank, shoot enemy tanks in a single-screen field of tile-based mazes, which can be shot through to make new paths. Each level has a predefined number of enemy tanks to shoot, after which you get to the next level. As an additional job, you need to defend your home base, represented by an eagle at the bottom of the screen. The game ends if the eagle is destroyed, or when you lose all your lives. You can even upgrade your tank to a more powerful one after killing enough of enemies and picking up upgrade items. Even if you're not particularly nostalgia drawn towards either Tank Battalion or Battle City, it's such an addicting concept that once you get better at it, it's almost impossible to quit playing. Highly recommended.